So our little ministry called Psalm68five, a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy dwelling. Now, I've meditated on this verse a lot, and sorry if I'm turning my back on, but not the best where to stand here. I think, when I think about it, I think, God could have inspired David to say, a father to everyone, or all of God's children. And that probably would have been fair. Or he could have said, this is through a David psalm, he could have said a father to the Israelites. And that probably would have seemed appropriate too. But David was inspired to say a father to the fatherless. And as I think about that piece of it, I think I can only think of two possibilities for that statement. That one, that it sounds nice, it's bold, and it's a nice platitude, but there's really no meaning or anything behind it other than it's a nice thing to say. Or, what I believe it means is that if you have a father and are blessed with growing up with a father in this life, or for part of it, that is a blessing from God. But to those kids who don't have a father growing up, God promises and says, I will come in and be that father to the fatherless. There may be other possibilities, and I'd love to hear if I'm missing something, but I think that is a promise to fatherless kids, and a promise that they should know. It's one I never heard growing up. But it's a promise. And I'm going to challenge you also, a couple things I want to ask you to think about. And Dr. Blakos is going to unpack some of this tomorrow in the scripture. But when we think of fatherless and orphans, especially in the church, do we think of them as being the same? And secondly, widows. When we think of widows in the church, do we think of the octogenarian type woman there that's lost her husband recently and maybe had grown kids? But do we also think of those fatherless kids and their mother? And anyway, that's just a couple thoughts I'm going to leave you with as I go into my part of this section. I also want to say that, again, Dr. Blakos is going to unpack a lot about that verses dealing with the fatherless, but beautifully, the New Testament then comes and lays on top of these images of what the Father heart of God is and what he has to say about the fatherless and who they are and who he is to them. But the New Testament, when you apply a verse like John 1:12 and 13, and I'll kind of paraphrase it, but yet to those who receive him, Jesus Christ, those that believe in his name, he gives the power, or in the King James the power, but the privilege, the right, or the authority to become children of God, born not of human desire or a husband's will, or whatever other circumstance you have here, broken or otherwise, but born of God. And when we look at this picture of God, who he is to the fatherless, and then we see how Christ comes in and completes that blessing, I think that's a powerful message that I would almost guarantee you most fatherless kids don't know about. They'll find out later. Just looking at the statistics of fatherless kids, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but from a great book, A Fatherless Generation by John Sowers, the statistics are horrendous. It's overwhelming. Sometimes it feels like it's just impossible. But 63% youth suicide, 71% of pregnant teenagers, homeless, all these things. I'll let you read them all, and they are in this great book. But it just seems overwhelming. And one thing that we've experienced at Camp Lake Louise is with these kind of statistics, when we bring these kids to our camps, we better be ready. This is not your suburban white kids coming in typically. A lot of kids have so much behavioral issues, and as I did growing up, or other things that they're dealing with, and it's important that we talk about how do we prepare for that, how are we ready, how do we prepare staff. But again, some of these statistics are just unbelievable. But I think we all have to look across town in Chicago to know that so many of these kids just have horrible statistical outcomes, and so at Psalm 68:5, our goal is to help change the trajectory of some of these poor statistical outcomes for fatherless kids into great outcomes. And we believe that identity, that showing them who their father is and the promises of that father, and that who they are as his sons and daughters is important. That's what we believe we can accomplish in a week at camp. So as we talked about, this summer our little ministry will provide over 300 camp scholarships to fatherless kids, full scholarships to the 5 partner camps that we'll have. And but we very much want to partner with those camps and learn from each other on how can we do this most effectively and specifically and intentionally for kids growing up without dads. So when I was growing up, and I grew up fatherless, and I'll share a little bit of that with you. I remember that I gave my life to Christ as a young boy at a Nuanas Club meeting. But sometime thereafter, a man, I don't remember who it was, I can't picture him. I don't exactly remember what he said, but he said something to me like this. He knew about my situation, and he said something to the effect of, do you know that in the Bible there's all these promises about how God comes in and takes care of kids that are growing up without dads? And again, I'm sure he didn't phrase it like that, but it was a little seed that was planted in my life. He didn't even share scripture with me, I don't believe. It was just this statement that there's a God of the Bible that specifically cares for you. And I remember that because as I grew older and I would learn more about God in the Bible, I would hear something or read something, and it would always take me back to, I remember somebody saying that over my life. And I think today, what if somebody had really sat down and shared with me all this scripture that will not return void, all this scripture in my life about how God, my Father, sees me and how I am, how my identity would be with him. So at camp, you have this great environment where kids are unplugged from the world, and they're wondering what's going to happen, and they're excited about it, and there's a lot of great activities, a lot of adventures and high fives. And I think that it creates that kind of soil in their heart. It softens that up. It breaks up some of those clumps, some of those hard places where these seeds can be planted and begin to be watered for them. And that's essentially our whole mission strategy. Obviously, we're there to minister to the fatherless children, but if we can also reach their mothers somehow, mothers of those fatherless children, so that they can continue to drip feed, if you will, on these kids, and they know, and then they see themselves in that picture, in God's story, and how he's laid it out, and they can help them continue that journey. And then, as Rob will talk about, just training up all these staff then in not only understanding God's provision and and word for the fatherless, but then actually being able to minister in that way. Tim helped put this little set of slides together, and I'm going to share this quickly. But at Psalm 68:5, our sphere of influence is to work with Christian camps. But not only what we're looking to do, again, what we're looking to do here is that we want to give these scholarships to kids, have fatherless kids come to camp, but we want to be excellent at sharing this message of God's heart. And I'm going to share a little bit more of that later on. But intentional and excellent at planting those seeds of God's heart and identity, then why wouldn't those resources, materials, also be of value to youth pastors, to other ministries, to the fatherless kids, to, again, to single mothers, and to mentoring organizations, big brothers, big sisters, different types of orphan care, foster care, and prison ministries. I have a little testimony I give to kids that are growing up fatherless, and there was an adult there, or several, but afterwards they asked me, would you come speak to our prison ministry? Because all these guys in prison, almost all of them grew up fatherless. And that same message that applies to kids, they need to hear also. So, how did that get in? Oh, well, actually, I'm going to ask your indulgence here. I'm going to seemingly take a different tack. I'm going to get some water here real quick, too. But I'm going to take some time and share a tribute, if you will, to a former Wheaton student and a graduate from Wheaton College. And I'm going to try to bring it back to full circle, so we won't totally depart and then leave you hanging there. We'll bring it back. This man on the left is Bruce G. Johnson from Harbor Beach, Michigan, the thumb of Michigan. If you asked him what his identity was as a young man, he would probably say, I'm an athlete. That was he was all about baseball, football. In fact, he came to Wheaton College from a family of very limited means, but came there to play baseball and all the sports and be a physical education major, and also to be a coach, hopefully, growing up later on. In order to help pay for college, because they did not have sufficient means, he joined with Army ROTC. And you can see him here. And there was a club called High C Club. Is it still around? I don't think so. Okay. But very much a club that would minister to inner city high school kids. And he was in his ROTC, so you might even picture some other students around here in their ROTC outfits. But here's Bruce at one of those club meetings. And so part of his being with the High C is he was a coach to an inner city basketball team. And from what I hear, they played in the city championship. I don't know whether they won or not, but anyway, he had a coach's heart. And so that's like a important picture for me. When he was between his junior and senior years, I guess that happened maybe more often back then, he married his high school sweetheart, Kathleen Weiss, from the Thumb, who just finished nursing school. And after graduating from college, they had their first child, Bruce H. Johnson, Not much to look at in this picture, but the second child, boy, he was like... Anyway, after starting that family, though, there's that commitment. Once you go into Army ROTC, then you go into active service. His first posting, if you will, was in Germany, and he was actually at Checkpoint Charlie. And here's a picture of him welcoming some escapees from East Germany during the Cold War. The second call of duty was to Vietnam in 1964. And again, here's a picture of him sharing his rations with Vietnamese kids. In my mind, I see them probably as kids, possibly without dads around. So back home, though, in Christmas of 1964, my mother wanted to send him a picture of his kids and his family back home. But this kind of became a familiar picture as the years grew up, and we got a little older, but it was similar. A little aside, I have this picture actually when I share my story with kids. I don't tell them much about Vietnam, I just say my dad went away. But I said to a group just a couple weeks ago, now what's missing in this picture? And they all go, no color. And I said, oh, yeah, it is black and white. And finally I said, well, there used to be like a guy up here. Oh, your dad's not there. And I kept going, but after a while I thought back of how this becomes so normal in so many of our cultures and areas and cities in the U.S. that they wouldn't even think that any person is missing from that picture. So this is December 1964. About 6 months later, June 10th, 1965, a group in Vietnam were building a field. Their field got overrun by 3 battalions of the North Viet Cong troops. And my dad was asked to lead a couple helicopters to come in as he was a captain in the Army at that time, called a MAC-V advisor, to come in and try to either help or recover bodies. We don't know exactly the full thing of the mission, but as he was coming in, his helicopter took mortar fire and was brought down with a pretty significant crash. My dad was able to get a radio pack, and he made a call and connected with the helicopter that was in the area. He said, situation is hopeless, all members of our crew are dead. That's it. They said, no, we're going to try to come in, let's try to get together, here's an area where we'll try to get. About that time they were talking, my dad's helicopter on the ground took some more fire, and there was radio silence after that. They didn't hear anything more. Their helicopter took on some fire, and they had to leave the area. Also, somewhere around there, it's all kind of foggy or fuzzy, but somehow in my dad's file, there was a report put that said there was a sighting of a tall American who spoke Vietnamese. He did Vietnamese school in Monterey, but that there was a sighting of an American POW somewhere in that area, and that got into his file. So even though it seemed pretty hopeless for that situation at the time, he was declared missing in action. And again, at that time, I was 4 years old, Colleen was 2, and Bruce was 5. And we assumed then he's a POW. We held out hope that he was a POW. We hoped he wasn't being tortured. But from that day forward, June 10th, 1965, I don't know if some of you remember the bracelets, probably the older people that, but we wore that bracelet for many years. And